Welcome to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, where we are on a mission to answer 4 questions from some of the best leaders and leadership minds in the country. So with that, we are pleased to have our special guest, Steve deBree. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, Dave, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, great to have you. Great to have you. Hey, introduce yourself to our listeners, a little bit about your background, kind of who you are, what you do. Just give us the scoop.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, my name is again Steve deBree. I'm up in Portland, Maine. The name of my practice is Performance Possibilities Group. I've been in the training and development field since 1987. Sometimes I just say decades, but
I was gonna say you don't have me beat by a few years. I told people I've been in training and development in some form or fashion since '93. So,
oh my goodness,
close enough.
Yes, and I've worked. I've been blessed to be able to work with organizations in helping develop leaders, both sales and organizationally. Delivered processes and worked with companies on 6 of the 7 continents. So I've had a lot of background in that. Headquartered out of Portland, Maine. If I'm near an airport, we can get wherever we need to be. And now with the virtual world here, it makes it so much easier.
Oh, amen. So I can't believe. So lazy. You haven't done any training and development on Antarctica. Come on, man.
Well, there are a few offices down there, but, I'm not sure the travel costs might be a little much,
Yeah, I was going to say the juice might not be worth the squeeze for that.
Absolutely.
For that gig.
Absolutely.
No, quite impressive. So, yeah, tell us a little bit more about like a little bit about some of the things you do with companies, just to kind of, people hear training and development and sometimes they just hear it, and they're like, all right, squishy HR, tree huggy kind of, people hear training and they're like, oh God, shoot me,
Yeah. And I think
we'll flush that out a little bit more.
Yeah, we've evolved over time. One of the things I've really focused with, I'm affiliated with a couple different organizations, and I focused an awful lot on the area of sales performance, working with sales organizations, both from a skill standpoint, a mindset standpoint, helping them to embrace a disciplined process, and then the sales leadership, really equipping leaders to coach and develop their people in a very ethically oriented sales approach and methodology. One of the process that I bring to organizations is called integrity selling. I know some people think that's sort of an oxymoron. In the past, when I first started, they said there is no integrity in selling, and I said, well, there is. It was founded by Ron Willingham, and Ron's passed away a few years now, but he was a great mentor in my life, and it was just very ethics driven, values based, customer needs focused approach, and then how do you lead that type of culture, and what are the factors that go into effective leadership in that? And then one of the things that impacts sales performance is as a salesperson, they're out there making promises to customers about what will happen, or clients, and everybody behind the scenes being able to help them deliver on the promise. Because if folks don't believe in what they're selling, they're now in sort of an ethical quagmire of, okay, I don't feel right promoting something that I've got doubts that we can deliver it. So in order to enhance sales performance, that often means dealing with other aspects of the organization and leadership components of that. How do people function to be focused truly on the needs of other people, so that ultimately customer or client needs get met? So and some of the things we offer are very foundational around that area in both sales, service, and coaching. But those platforms need to be then led. Somebody has to say, this is the way we're going. So that's sort of does that add any clarity?
That adds quite a bit of it, and hopefully it adds some for the listeners too, because it's not just as much of, okay, well, do training and development. You're like, okay, and your point is what? And then you talk about sales. Okay, so you're teaching people to sell, but you're focused in on the leadership aspect of it, because, I mean, honestly, if you train the leaders right, they have a disproportionate impact on sales versus because they've got all the people underneath of them. You can have a much bigger impact in the organization dealing with the leadership component of it versus sales versus just, hey, I come in and do training for the sales team.
And so much of it, Dave, people will focus on sales skills, but an incredibly important element of sales performance is mindset. and
Yes.
mindset. And actually,
I would dare say more important, because you can train skills.
yes, the skills are necessary.
It's hard to train the fear of call reluctance out of somebody if they're off the chart.
Yeah, like I like to say, skills are necessary but not sufficient. And you really need to have the mindset piece. And here's the key is that, and you'd mentioned call reluctance, that's one of the aspects that we work with people. But the call reluctance, these are mindsets that get in the way, make people anxious and anxiety. They either hesitate, procrastinate, or avoid doing certain activities. But all but one of the forms of call reluctance, which they've identified, they're learned. And one of the biggest, and several factors, colleagues, leadership, sales leadership positions will, if you will, train people to be call reluctant in certain areas, and external trainers and internal trainers. So you need to be very careful who you let near the minds of your people. So,
wow, I did not realize that most of it was learned, and some of it was actually trained into by the same people that are like, why aren't my people selling? Well, you kind of did this.
Well, Dave, that speaks to initially, I learned about call reluctance piece because when I heard that, in good conscience, I said, I'm going out training on skills. I didn't want to have people say after the fact, well, Steve, they loved your seminar, but our call volumes dropped down. People aren't calling on people anymore, because I have predispositions that I know now, and I've worked on them and let those go. But I had some that were very significant, and I could have, if you will, infected the mindset piece with other groups.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's something to definitely work on the leadership on, because you think about it, they're investing in training for their salespeople to, like I said, improve their sales skills or whatever. But from a leadership aspect, if you're doing something that's basically completely counterintuitive, like they're more call reluctant now because of what you trained them to do or what you told them to do, or they had a bad experience. I mean, I interviewed a gentleman a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about good ideas and engagement. And we were talking about, okay, the first time you stick your head up and you get, whack-a-mole across the head, right? It's like, you're not going to pop. There's no more good ideas that are going to be flowing. And not just from that guy, because they said, oh, look what happened to Joe, right? And then the good idea fairy stops coming around, and you're just going to have to suck it up and figure it out yourself, versus same kind of thing. If you end up doing something that makes them more call reluctant from what you're actually doing, like I said, most of the time they're the ones coming to a sales training organization saying, my people aren't performing like they should. Well, if it's something you did, it's your fault. It's like, they may not even know it from a leadership perspective on what they did, I'm sure, to cause them to have that reluctance in their performance be low.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, let's jump into our first question. So, Steve, what does leadership mean to you, and what does good leadership look like?
Well, leadership, when I think about it, there's an awful lot been written on it from various authors and people that do leadership training and development. And one of the things I think about, I've gone back, John Kotter has written some great work, and he had a book years ago called A Force for Change: The Difference Between Leadership and Management. And because you deal with folks in an organization, and a lot of times you've got people, quote unquote, in leadership roles, which we think about higher up in the organization, but they're really functioning like managers. And the way Kotter made the distinction for me made an awful lot of sense. Leadership is all about saying, here's where we're going, gang. This is the direction. This is the vision. This is where we're headed. Yeah. And create and sharing that inspired vision doesn't necessarily mean that they have created it on their own. This is sort of the vision that people have bought into, and this is where we're headed. They keep it front and center. The second component of that he talks about is ongoing communication to everybody who needs to be enrolled and supporting it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, a lot of times people say, we're doing change. We have to get everybody on board. I was working with a colleague a number of years ago, and we used to talk about critical mass of awareness, where you have disturbed the status quo, if you will, the homeostasis of the group, but you get enough momentum so that people will either get on board or not, or it's going to be uncomfortable not being on board. And it's not because anybody's criticizing them, but leaders keep that vision there. And then the third element, he said, and I thought about this, what leaders really do is motivating and inspiring people to overcome the major bureaucratic, political, and resource barriers to change. And we run into those. So leaders do that really effectively. And he said, and they do it by meeting basic but often unfulfilled human needs. And one of the things that comes up is recognition and appreciation for work, and being a sense of being in on things. So leaders have a great way. And I think about, some of the work that's level 5 leaders. I think about, I was the problem, but you folks are the ones that made it work. But I think leaders are very generous in their recognition, specifically about what people do, and that sense of appreciation that's there. So when you think about that, what does it mean to do? It's about gathering the energy of people and helping people to focus that energy towards a direction. And this is what we're out, if you will, developing the cause. What's the cause? What's the sense of meaning behind what we're doing, if you will? And that's, I think, and in good leadership, you'll see people keeping that clear. And he talked about over communicating by a factor of 10. You think you've said it. Oh, I told him once in a memo. No, it's front and center all the time. And then I am connected to people around that. So there you go. This is my long length.
No, I love that. And a couple of things that I like. One, I love that when you were talking about the Cotter definition, the change as far as getting rid of the bureaucratic and the
political and resource barriers to change. Yeah.
Yes, and not that, because you hear it all the time. It's almost a cliche. You want to vomit and get everybody on board. Well, you're never going to get everybody on board.
Yeah.
Ever. But I like what you were talking about, critical mass. Like you get enough that it's almost like Jim Collins's flywheel, right? You just start to get enough momentum that it just keeps going on its own with you, not you having to push the boulder up the hill.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's funny when you talked about Cotter, which is, I've got several Cotter books over here on my on my bookshelf anyway, especially being that was kind of my major in, going through my doctorate stuff. But I will say that what I like how you were talking about the distinction that he makes between leadership and management. But it's funny because I had one guy that it was brilliant the way he kind of put it, talk about having a contrarian fatal leadership. And he's like, no, it's true. It's like, it's really hard to be a good leader and be a sorry manager. Because management being a skill set. It's like going back to the scientific management stuff in the 1920s and to the turn of the century, it was kind of, it's like Gulick, I think it was at Positive Corp. They talk about planning, organizing, delegating, budgeting, all that kind of stuff. If you've got, it's a skill set you have to have to be in those types of positions. But that doesn't mean that just because I can have that skill set doesn't mean I can actually cast a vision, get people inspired, get people to move and want to change and want to do things. But unless there's some guys that are just the vision guy, and then maybe you have your Bill Gates, and then you have your Steve Ballmers that basically boot the ground to get stuff done. But it's hard to say, I've got a vision. I'm a nonprofit leader. I'm an executive, right? And a nonprofit CEO at a nonprofit. And I can't budget to save my skin. And I can't plan an event, if I had to, you know what I mean? And there's not too many times you're going to go to the board and you're going to be X number of % over budget that they're going to keep you in that position, right? So you can have the most visionary ideas all day long, but if you don't have that managerial skill set, it's going to be tough to stay organizationally in those levels.
Yeah, and you need to have those competencies. See, the higher you go in the organization, and my feeling is the broader your realm of stewardship, the care and feeding of the organization. But here's one of the things is that while leadership goes with title and position, it's not limited to title and position.
Correct.
Okay, so here I was flying out to Seattle earlier this week, and I was in an exit row, and you have to answer a verbal yes. Will you be willing to assist in the event of an evacuation? And really, the underpinning is assume a leadership role, because I got to open the door, I got to stay there and help people out. There's a leadership role that goes. I have no title and position relative to that, other than the placement of where I am. So leadership is really a field we step into. And I know I've had colleagues of mine that have said they've been at, C-level meetings, and there was somebody who's an executive assistant that would ask a clarifying question that got everybody back front and center as to what the issue was. You see, so it's I think that's very important. It goes with title position, but it's not limited to that. Well, you're the leader, and that people want to delegate that. Well, who in the moment needs to keep the vision, keep the cause front and center? That's the question.
Which is one of the reasons I love about Maxwell's definition of it being influence. Pretty much nothing more, nothing less, and with that, like I said, it is a title and position. It's more of a verb, all right? Or you're actually doing it. It's not that you are, because I'm at a position in the org chart. It's what are you doing, right? People see people jump into action, like you were talking about with the seat at the flight. All right, right there, you're showing leadership by, hey, I get up, I open the door, come on, people, let's go. And you're doing leadership. You don't have to wait for the job description to come to be able to say, well, I'm a leader now, I can do this. But you're right. It's verbs that is an action, not as much, and it doesn't matter. Like I said, perfect example about that executive assistant. Like I said, sometimes those people are the glue that keep the executive team going.
I experienced that just this past week. Yeah, just this past week when the client we were working with, that person was she was the cog that kept everything going. But the irony is, I would expect, okay, I'm gonna get a leadership role here in the plane. Do I get a discount on the seat? No, that seat's more expensive. Legroom. That's why.
Legroom. I was gonna say, yeah, right. That's not because of the potential leadership role. That's strictly legroom. You're gonna pay for that. That's a precious commodity on a flight.
You got it. You got it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said about business class.
Yep, absolutely.
Put it in the bill.
You got it.
Oh, well, with that sounds like a great place. We're going to end the first segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, but we will be back with Steve in just a few moments with our second and third question. So see you in a bit.
Okay.
Welcome back to our next segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, where we are here with Steve deBree, our special guest. So with that, we're going to jump straight into our second question. What was the biggest leadership challenge that you've had to face?
Ooh, biggest leadership challenge I've had to face. Well, when I think about that, biggest leadership challenge, as a person in a practice of one, surrounded by, it's not now like I have to, like I've got a lot of people, but I interact with an awful lot of folks, both organizations that I use their intellectual property, I use their assessments. You and I have similar organizations we work with. But I remember working in Canada and working with a broadcasting company, and this is a number of years ago. And probably the biggest leadership challenge was in the moment. One of the things that you suffer from as a leader is when you're sending mixed messages. Well, I read a great work by Chris Argyris from Harvard Business School a number of years ago. It's called "Flawed Advice and the Management Trap," and the subtitle is "Why the Advice Consultants Gives Managers Doesn't Work." And I was like, "Oh my God, I need to read this." And he started to describe sort of and he talks about model 1 and model 2, but he talked about sort of when you espouse certain things, yet there's a gap between what people experience. And this is what will undermine any change effort, this pattern. And I put it right out there up front. And I did this with this group. And I really, and a colleague of mine, and we pretty much knew that we could do this. But you always wonder. We had managers from all over Canada. We were in this meeting, and the executive vice president who brought us in was sitting in the group. And I pretty much knew the answer from them. But so, you espouse something, there's a gap. Now, here's what will undermine it is if that gap becomes undiscussable, you can't raise the issue. Okay. Or there'll be sanctions. And you can't talk about the fact you can't talk about it. So we've got something that's a gap. I raise my hand and I get sanctioned for it. So I'm not going to, and somebody, I'm new to an organization. I say, gee, I want to raise my hand. They say, keep your hand down. Yeah, I need to say it. Keep your hand down. And then don't go there if you know it's good for you. And then they say, forget we even had this conversation. So it's like, you can't talk about the fact you can't talk about it. So everybody walks around painting a smile on their face that everything's fine. And really, that's not. So I asked the gentleman here, I'm setting this up because I asked him, I said, if there are mixed messages that you unintentionally send, but are heard that way, what is it that you want folks, to say, I mean, in terms of a challenge for me in the moment. And he stood up and said,
Right.
the perfect answer. He says, I want to know about it. That's not what I want. There'll be no sanctions. And by the way, he lived that out, because now I'm espousing this. You bring something up and I cut your legs out, then all of a sudden there's a disconnect. And
Yeah.
I remember in that moment that was one of the most, because there was a departure. He was new to that organization, and the prior ownership who was in that position did not function that way.
Yeah. And that goes to organizational trust. And it's funny because Ed is a beautiful example. I'll absolutely have to steal that one, because one guy interviewed it, Mike Mears, brilliant guy. He was the chief people officer over at the CIA, and he started their CIA Leadership Academy. And he had a 3-step model that I thought was a thing of beauty. It was great. He talked about think about it as a pyramid. The first layer on the bottom was psychological safety. You got to be able to talk. You got to be able to say something without knowing you're going to get, like I said, your legs cut out for on you. You're not going to get beat down for it. I mean, you're not going to. You have to have that. I can bring stuff to you, and I'm not going to get berated. The second one is trust. Because I can't build trust if I don't have that psychological safety that I can bring you something and not take a beat down for it. And so once you get the trust, he said the last part is you have to be, to your point on over communication, you have to be crystal clear on what you expect. It's clarity. So he had psychological safety, trust, and clarity. And so once they had that safety, you built that trust with them, because, like I said, what you're espousing and what you're doing match, right?
Yes.
I've said it for years. Nothing is worse, and nothing makes me angrier than seeing I got vision, mission, values on the board. And the only 2 times that we ever see them is either A, when you're onboarding the first day in the employee handbook, or B, when you happen to be walking by to the CEO's office and you happen to see them on the wall. But other than being on the wall, them being in the employee manual and what actually happens every day from the CEO down don't match ever.
Yep.
I mean, but that's very common, unfortunately.
Oh yeah.
It's way more common than it should be. But you're right. He said once you get those 3 and you get that clarity on what you expect them to do and they're crystal on it, he said you can literally pour gasoline on that fire, and the performance is just unreal, because they know that if there's an issue, they can come back to you. You've got that trust because what you say and what you do match, and they're crystal clear on what you need them to do. Man, then it's off to the races. I was like, I like that, man. That's cool.
Sorry, every time you say crystal, the image of Jack Nicholson in the movie A Few Good Men comes to mind. Are we clear? Crystal. Are we clear?
Yeah.
That's all. I mean, that wasn't really a safe conversation, but crystal. I mean, then people like that clarity. Then there's no misunderstanding.
No misunderstanding whatsoever. Yeah. And I love to go back to what you said about Cotter. I've been saying it for years, and I probably picked it up for Cotter, and you just don't even realize sometimes where you pick things up, and you're just, you latch on to something that speaks to you. But when you talked about over communication, yes, I mean, you feel like you get so sick of hearing it, but the people they don't hear it. I remember the story about Truett Cathy and how he went and he stayed, speaking at a conference or whatever, and he went to a Ritz-Carlton, and that's where he first got kind of introduced to the whole My Pleasure thing,
Yes.
He's like, oh my God, this is great. And he realized there's the level of customer service is like, why can't we bring this to Chick-fil-A? And he did it at the big convention. Oh, we're going to say My Pleasure. And he got him saying it back, whatever. And it was like 2 or 3 or plus years. I mean, just of constantly saying this before it, and probably just the accountability of secret shopper them to death until finally, like, if you get pegged enough on your secret shopper, like, this is not going to end well for you. But I mean, at some point, he owned a privately owned company. He owned it. He's trying to push this initiative and had to over communicate it probably 20-fold. And he would talk versus what you think. All right, I just sent out a memo, or I sent an email, or I told them they're just going to do it. No, he had to constantly sell that thing. So you're dead on when you talk about the over communication, because we just forget to do that. We get so sick of hearing about it, but that doesn't mean it's sunk in here with everybody, and it has become habit.
Yeah. A couple things just to piggyback off what you're saying. I mean, there's a service process we do called Integrity Service, and it's a very simple communication. And usually people get upset when I present it to them, because then they will evaluate all their service experiences. They go out and then people are going to mess up on the way home. And the final step in this community, very simple. Well, it's a flow to a conversation, a human to human interaction. The final step is what we call the invite step. And I'm on a personal mission, like you just mentioned it, because I check out somewhere and I say thank you, and they say you're welcome, and I'm like, wait a minute, didn't I just give you money and you're saying you're welcome for the honor of doing business with you? The other thing is I hear two phrases all the time. Somebody says no problem and no worries, and I'm like, okay, so when you really sparse that, all people are saying is you didn't irritate me. No problem was it? All they're saying is you weren't a negative. Now I know you think about it. And people say, well, it doesn't matter, or no worries, you weren't a worry. And I'll say, okay, well, have two customers next to each other. Let's do an A/B test like you do in marketing. Tell one person, oh, no problem, no worries. And tell the other person, hey, my pleasure, great to see you. See if there isn't some difference in the experience somebody has. Now, the other thing I just want to touch on, and you were nailing it, one of the processes I used to work with, Vital Smarts, and they've got a great book, Crucial Conversations, Crucial Confrontations. Yep. But I used to represent them and use the path of dialogue. And the entry point to all dialogue is shared purpose or mutual intent. I want what you want. And when you spoke to, what the gentleman from the CIA spoke to, safety was what maintains it. So the first thing is we've got to be alignment in what we want. And that's why I think leadership, this is the mission. Here's where we're headed. Here's the direction. That's sort of that ultimate sense of meaning for folks that they show up every day to plug in. I worked with Dr. Kenneth Thomas, who wrote a great book called Intrinsic Motivation at Work. And the entry point where we plugged in to the organization every day was around purpose, or it was around meaning. What's the meaning of the work? And I think great leaders, by the way, keep that front and center. The other thing is, one of the other motivators, intrinsic motivators, is a sense of choice. So to what extent in my leadership, do I help give people latitude so they can make choices? How do I set up systems? Now, this blends in management a bit too, but how do I help? Am I all about helping people to experience a sense of competence in the activities that they choose, and that they're feeling they're making progress? I think great leaders in their conversations will appeal and make sure they're giving energy every day to create an environment that those elements flourish. Meaning, choice, competence, not confidence, competence. That the systems are set up so people feel they're doing their job well and that they're making progress every day.
Yeah. And you're right. It's energy. It takes a lot out of somebody to do that. And a lot of times it's just easier to not. That's why most of the time I don't think it does happen, because it does take energy. It takes effort. It takes very deliberate intent to do that.
Yes.
Where now, don't get me wrong, the benefits that you reap from that are great. I mean, that's how you build culture. You constantly have to sell it. You constantly have to be, like you said, putting energy into it to get these experiences. But think about what ends up coming about from the employee experience, how they feel, and then how they turn around and give that to the customers. I mean, I a friend of mine that getting over cancer, and they went to several cancer treatment centers at different hospitals around and for different things. And then at some point they said they ended up going to Cancer Treatment Centers of America. And I kind of giggled because I knew where the conversation was getting ready to go. And they were like, oh my God, they were so nice and they were so wonderful. It's kind of like the difference between going to, just a crappy fast food place where everybody's got their shirt tail out and it's like, yeah, let me take your money, here's your burger, whatever, versus the my pleasure kind of. It's kind of like the Disney or the Chick-fil-A of cancer treatment centers. And she was like, oh my God, like everybody's so wonderful, everybody's so great. So she asked, like, why is everybody like this? Like, no other place I've ever been has been like this. Like, and they're all supposed to care for the cancer patients and stuff, but like nobody has ever been like this. How is it? They treat us like gold. They treat their employees so well that they just can't help but just overwhelmingly treat their patients so good. And that's why that's why I kind of giggled. And she used to, well, like, you knew that. I'm like, yes, I've heard it before. It's like Disney is known for their experience, right? So these people are known for this. So as you have some of these companies that take these concepts that you talked about, Steve, seriously, and like I said, the end result is spectacular. But it does take a lot of energy and deliberate effort to do that, and that's tough. And a lot of folks don't want to put that time and effort and energy into it. But It's worth
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah. We were fortunate at the TTI convention this year to have Joseph Pine, who's done a lot of work on the experience economy. He was speaking to that. The other thing, you're sort of laying out a framework that's been my go-to sort of organizational strategy when I go in. If they don't believe that, what you just said, if they're not leaders, then they're not a good prospect for doing work with us. Some great work written by James Heskett a number of years ago called The Service Profit Chain. And it speaks exactly to what you just talked about. And by the way, it starts with leadership and it cascades down internally. Internal quality is the next factor, and that's really leadership drives internal quality, and that's all about to what extent are people empowered to create value directly for end customers, and then how is there a spirit of service internally that I'm here to meet your needs. And those are two very specific things that leaders do. And that cascades down then. They create more value. Customers are satisfied. They come back. And then it all trickles down to, guess what? We're profitable. I'm going to make the full circle here because one of the organizations they cite in their book is Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
That's their guiding principles right there.
Exactly. And I laugh because I always use the joke that when somebody gets to be an owner or operator, it's like you not only get the certificate from Chick-fil-A Incorporated, you also get something in the mail from the U.S. Department of Treasury, basically giving you a license to print money, right?
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. I like that.
And I asked a guy who was one of their chief experience people, he worked with their brand stuff for years, and friends with the current CEO. They went to school together, as far as the Truett's grandson. But anyway, I asked him about that, and it was like Chick-fil-A purposely put a limit on their growth, and it wasn't money, it wasn't stores, it wasn't whatever. Because I read an article about them and Wendy's just went gangbusters, right? He said our limit to growth was how fast we could adequately develop our leadership pipeline. If we couldn't develop the leaders properly, we weren't going to build the stores. It said, but as we focused all our concentration on developing our leaders and getting our people where they needed to be, then, we'd open a store. Then we would open a store. And that ultimately made them more stores, more profitable, better overall as a organization, because they were more focused on the leadership pipeline than the traditional business. Do we have the money? Can we acquire the land? Can we get it built? Can we put an ad out in the paper for a general manager? You can, but that's not the same as the internal leadership development that they would do. And so, and I love that idea, is because, and what ends up being the result, like 20 years later, they're way more profitable and they're way more, they're all over the place, but it was because they put that focus on the leadership. I thought that was fantastic.
I guess they weren't developing leadership as fast up here in the Northeast because we had one store in Bangor, 2 hours north. And during COVID, the store in Westbrook, which is only about an 8-minute drive from where I am here in Portland, that finally opened. And I got to tell you, they had to have police. They were in sort of the parking lot of a huge grocery store. They had to have the Westbrook police directing traffic. Now, the grand opening, lines, just unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
But there are still lines, except for today being a Sunday. They closed on Sundays.
Right, because they're closed. But it's funny because they've got the 2 or 3, and I've even seen 4, the drive-through lanes and the people working it. And I mean, they're like looped around the building, and you're still just getting out of there like it's nothing. I mean,
it's unbelievable.
Like I said, license to print money.
That's what it is, and without fear of any repercussion from the federal government.
You get the official certification from the U.S. Department of Treasury when you become an owner operator, granting you a legal license to print money, called owning a Chick-fil-A.
That's fascinating. The story though about my pleasure and where that came from. Yeah.
And what I didn't know, I knew it had come from Ritz-Carlton. I knew he put it in, and I knew it was, this like high-end luxury experience that he was overwhelmed with from a customer experience aspect, and bring that down to something like fast food. From a cultural standpoint, interviewing this gentleman, what got me was how long it took to get into the culture, how long it took to become a habit. And then he was saying it and saying it and saying it. That's why I was, when you mentioned about the over communicate 10 times, I was like, amen, because he was constantly selling it. It's frustrating him, I think, to a point where, like, why isn't this taking? And when it finally did, to your point, it just hit critical mass, and then it was done. Like, it's just part of what we do, and then it's truly part of the culture. Like, why would we ever do it any other way? That's just how we do it here.
Absolutely.
But to get to any of that point in an organization from a culture standpoint is a lot of energy and a lot of work.
And you've got to sustain it. When people come and they say, "Gee, I want to change the culture," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, culture is." You might change the work climate, work environment, but culture is what gets passed on to new employees by the existing employees. So this is how we do things here. How long does it take for that to get entrenched? And it's usually, it's a couple of years to get things entrenched like that. And that's why it takes the energy. We used to do our certifications in the Integrity Network in Phoenix at the Ritz-Carlton at the corner of 24th and Camelback Road. And I remember I'd check in and I'd walk up to the gate, the front desk, and they'd say, "Welcome back, Mr. deBree." And how do they know? Well, the guys handling the luggage, they had a whole system. They checked the name tag and all this, and they had, boom, they know at the front desk. They had it, and you didn't know the system, but I got to tell you, welcome back, nice to see you, because they have pulled up your portfolio, and they give a little quick description so they knew who it was. It was an unbelievable service. And by the way, that's why we used to love to take our potential prospects and clients out there, because of the experience they'd have with them. And they were a partner of ours for years.
Nice. Yeah. I love it. It's almost like, it's funny. It's like the radio thing. It's kind of like years and years and years ago. And I was a little kid, man. My mom, we were in the Virginia Beach area, right? So mom and dad would take us up to Richmond to go see Santa Claus, right? There was a Miller and Rhodes in downtown Richmond. And the guy he looked it. He was it, right? And of course, just lines out the door, right? And so the lady dressed up as an elf. "All right, little boy, what's your name?" And you put a name. "What do you want?" And stuff like that, right? And she's put, and you're way back in the line. So by the time, especially as a kid, by the time you get up to Santa Claus's lap, man, you forgot you talked to the elf, right? But she had the little radio, and she, "Hey, this is so and so. Here's his name. Here's what he wanted." And all of a sudden, you're like, "Holy crap, it's magic!" Right? Santa actually knows my name and it knows what I want. And oh my god, but they did that same type of thing, the radio thing, where they feed it in his ear. But yeah, for Ritz-Carlton to do that same thing, I was like, that's. How can you go better? Calling people by name, and they've got a little description. And how's the wife? How's Fido doing? And it's like, really?
They had the whole dossier right there. Well, welcome back. And they knew the last time I stayed there. "Oh, it's been a few months since you've been here." What? Really? And they knew your preference. That's great systems too. But you got people, people executing them. That's the other thing, Yeah.
And if you think about the different businesses that are out there, and if they could just think about if more places put that kind of effort and energy into that type of system for their customers, how much more profitable and how much of their customers would have a better experience just by even getting half of that.
Yeah.
Versus, no problem. Here's the change, and here's your burger. Have a nice day.
And it comes out. It's sort of the vernacular. It's easy. And some of my clients that have been through our service program, and they hear me just rail against it. That sometimes just in the heat outside say, "Hey, no problem." And then I saw when we were doing a Zoom, and the guy looked up and I said, "Oh, it's not just not a problem. It's my pleasure." And I got you, because you're just around it so much that it rolls out. And I'm happy to. I had people say, "Well, they took that home." And instead of just saying no problem to a spouse or significant other, "Hey, I love to, happy to," and just it's a subtle shift. It's a subtle shift,
much, but
incredibly significant. Yeah,
but people pick up on it. Well, that's actually a perfect segment into our question 3, and then we'll wrap this segment up. But what do you see as one of the biggest mistakes leaders make today?
Well, over the years, one of the things is, a lot of times it depends on style, but people who ascend and get into a senior level and then get lost in their Excel spreadsheets or whatever the data is now. I know data isn't important, but they lose the connection with their people, or maybe they've been promoted up because they were good along those lines. And the other thing is really is micromanaging people. Well, they get lost in the management piece and then micromanage. Now, going back to, working with Dr. Thomas, I mean, to the extent that I can help people make choices on their own and develop that sense of choice they have, that means I've got to be comfortable enough to let go of that and let them make choices around it. And have I developed that competency? That's one of the biggest things I see is that, and I think we've worked an awful lot on it, but still, from a coaching standpoint, feeling like you have to be the expert and people come to you and then telling them what to do. And it might be out of the spirit of helping, but at the same time, when I'm telling them what to do, that comes across, and that's what I think about coaching. It's more, and I've seen situational leadership, and people need to have certain competencies, but getting people involved in making their own choices about how they approach things, and words matter so much for folks. And instead of saying, okay, well, and I heard people that are very skillful say, now I'm not saying this is the way you need to do it, but here's how I did it when I did it. Now, just to prime the pump, what could you do similar, or what does that bring to mind? So, because sometimes people are lost, and if I just keep asking them questions when I'm in a coaching conversation, they just get frustrated. But to start to prime the pump, but get them connected to creating the solution, and I think sometimes leaders are so results oriented that they bypass the process in order to just hit the outcome.
Right. And the bad part is not doing that is you're setting up almost like a codependency thing. Oh, I like the fact that they're coming and asking me and I'm the expert and I give them the answer. They're like, hey, I don't have to be responsible for coming up with the answer. I can just go to Joe and the boss and he just tells me, and it doesn't help them in the long run. You think you're helping them now.
Yep.
But it doesn't help them in the long run because they don't get to grow and develop and actually be able to come up with stuff on their own. But there's one thing you said that I really do like, and I think the pendulum can swing too far the other way. Will you tell me how you would do it? Well, I'll let you figure it out however you want to do it. Well, if somebody doesn't have context behind what it is you're asking them to do, they've never had the experience, they never had to do it, they never had whatever. So I love the idea of priming the pump, saying, I'm not saying how to do this, but let me give you an example of something I've done. So at least you can frame, now I know what you're asking. I know all right, I get it. And then they can use some creativity to come up with that or something different. But it is really frustrating when you're like, I don't know what he's or she's asking me to do.
Yes. Yeah. And
I don't have any context.
Yeah. And I hear people say, well, if you did know, well, I don't know how to do it. Well, if you did know, what would you do? I mean, and that sounds nice. That's a little bit flippant. Sometimes that's okay. But the other thing is it can just be frustrating. I need some help to get started. Where do I start and get moving? And then point me in the right direction. So, so people, like you said, it can go too far on the other extreme in terms of asking so many questions, for example, and then you toss it out. Now, how's that relevant for you? How would you adjust, modify, or discard it as you look at it? Is there something else you do now that you started?
And the further you go with them, I think the more they're going to be able to come up with their own original ideas because they've had some experience and they know how you are. And but straight out of the gate, I've been in that same spot. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And you're asking me to come up with something. Like I said, no context what you're even talking about. But then giving an example of something they did, they're like, all right, roger that, boss, got it. So then you can run with it.
Yeah, I'm lost right now. Well, what would you do if you were lost? Oh, I'd ask directions. That's what
which is what I'm doing.
So stop frustrating me. Oh, so that's one of the things. But you see, back in the back of my mind always is the work from Ken Thomas, and I'm thinking about sense of choice because it's really about intrinsic motivators, and that's what gets people engaged and connected to their work. So I want to make sure that through my conversations, I'm not draining that energy off by robbing that sense of choice, by not speaking to their sense of meaning, by even in my conversations with people demeaning their competence. And then, hey, and then not letting them establish a sense of progress by saying, you know what, maybe we hit that, but we got more to do. And this is, and not pausing to celebrate about how they move the needle. I think not being mindful of those elements is one of the mistakes. They do some, but not all.
Well, it's funny. One thing that I mean, just from recently, just doing one, you're talking about some of the assessment tools you use. And we're talking about one that's particular to employee engagement, and it's how much recognition plays. I mean, we think about organizational trust, and we think about lots of things, but it was amazing to see like what a big part recognition, frequency, types of recognition, how important that was towards engagement. How those scores really made a huge difference. And like I said, if you don't take a little time to celebrate and recognize it, they're like, well, why put in the effort? And I was telling somebody, I remember going through their particular executive coaching program and methodology. I love it. But I remember hearing Marshall Goldsmith talk a little bit of a story about, he talked about giving too much value, the concept of giving too much value. And I'm like, how does that happen? Like everyone's talking about you can't give enough value and give value to others. And I'm like, you hear it so much, like, what does that mean? But he was talking about somebody being like super excited about it. Somebody coming to you that works for you, and you're like, I got this idea, and we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, and whatever. And so like they're just off the chain, like this is their baby. And you go in there, and maybe you technically improve it. Oh well, if it was me, I'd do X, Y, and Z, whatever. Well, you might have technically improved it 5%, but you've demoralized them 75% now because it's your project, not theirs, and you've taken the air out of their sails, and now it's a grudge and a grind, not a I'm so thrilled to do this because this is my great idea. That's what they were talking about, adding too much value. So when you said something about that, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly the same concept that he was talking about.
Oh, it's just, and when you're unaware of that too, because you do it out of the spirit of trying to help make but it's the dynamic of what that means to the experience the other person has that many people are oblivious to. And if I get, when you and I go back to style, if I'm really just, hey, I'm a problem solver, results oriented, take charge, and my motivators, I want to be commanding and being then a lot of what comes naturally from me is counterproductive to my role as a leader in developing people. And and those, I think one of the things too, you and I both talk about blind spots. People, they don't know that they don't know that this is how they're being experienced by the people.
Yeah.
That's the other. And some people don't care. I'm in charge now. Well, I got to this point, and I have my I prevail over my domain. I listen very carefully. One of the things I always talked about is that I don't report to people. I report to the shared purpose of the business. Mm-hmm. And the CEO simply has the broadest realm of stewardship. Now everybody else goes down. So when I hear people, I have 200 people reporting into me. Oh, really? Okay. Well, so you're trying to make sure that your area is a little bigger than somebody else's, and we compare it by that. It's no, you have, and part of our language was always that a manager's role is to resource their team to maximize the team's contribution to the shared purpose. That's what I'm all about. And how do I do
love that?
Resource my team,
Yes. Well, and I would think about it as you're not the one serving the customers or the clients. You're serving the people who are serving the clients, or depending on how high up, you're serving the people that are serving the people that are serving the people that are serving our customers and clients. And so you're right. I let that focus back on shared purpose, not like a South Park episode with Eric Cartman, dressed up like a little cop going, "You will respect my authority," right? Because that's what a lot of folks do. Yeah, and it's like it's not about you, Sparky. It's just not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're tripping your ego. Like I said, it's some don't know, but some don't care. It's the dangerous ones are the ones that don't care, and it's all about their little fiefdom and like I said, their power trip or whatever. And it's like that's not serving your employees. And when people talk about the customers first, no, the customer's not first. The frontline employee who's serving that customer is first, because like going back to the cancer treatment center example. Yeah. If you're treating them so well, they can't help but pass that through to the customers. Where if you're all, I joke about them being the worst filtration system in the world, because you can't dump crap all over your frontline staff and expect them to filter it out and it be blue skies and puppy dogs, rainbows and unicorns to your customer. It doesn't happen. You just can't. But if you're dumping all the goodness on them and they feel the love, it is going to pass through, and your customers are going to get a great experience because the employees feel like they're having a good experience. And then you talk about to take it away from the tree huggy, fluffy HRA, stuff, right? You're going to increase your profitability because two of the biggest costs in an organization that aren't on your P&L. One's disengagement, one's turnover. Well, guess what? If these guys feel loved, and then what are less likely to leave, okay, they're probably going to do a really good job for your customers. So like I said, may increase sales, profits, whatever for that. They're going to be less disengaged, and so they're going to be more engaged. So, okay, that cost is going to go down. And for recruitment, they're going to know good people. Hey, I'm looking for a job. Dude, you need to come over here where I'm at. Man, this place is great. So, I mean, your recruitment costs go down, your turnover costs go down, probably more profitable because you have better customer experience, and your disengagement costs are going to go down because they're more in it to win it because you've actually, resourced them and they feel like this is a great place to work. So the financial benefit. So even if you're buried knee deep in a spreadsheet, right? Even the spreadsheet guy could come around when you realize, oh, there's actually hard dollars tied to this. Okay, yes. I could sign off on it.
Absolutely. No, yeah, agree so much on that. And it's interesting, you talk about the cost of disengagement and turnover, and they're not specific line items in the P&L, and they're difficult. They don't measure them. They measure stuff that's easier to measure. And
correct.
And the other thing is, what do we do about it? And we've got things to help people deal with this.
Exactly, and it's a tough discussion. What do we do about it? But there are things you can do about it. And to your point later, now I'll do this, and then we'll wrap up this particular segment. We'll come back for our third and final segment. But you had mentioned about it starting at the top. It has to start at the top. And you're talking about one of the books, and one of the authors talk about it starting at the top. And then if the top is right, and then it comes down to the internal quality, and then it goes to the customer. That's why any of my engagements, I learned a lesson the hard way. Unfortunately, you have to start with the senior leadership team. If they're not on board, if they're not there, yep, it's got to start. It's got to start at the top.
Yeah,
it always starts at the top. And if you don't, then if you can't get that senior leadership level, in the place, it's not. All the initiatives in the world are just going to be check the box, flavor of the month. Oh, we've seen this again, and there's going to be zero buy-in. You'll never hit the critical mass, and it's just a waste of time and money.
Yes, and by the way, then it breeds cynicism down the road, because then the next somebody else comes in. Oh, we've tried that, and then you see them sit back, and that's okay. Show me. No.
Can you overcome that? Yes, it's going to make your job 10 times harder to do it, to overcome that cynicism. But then you have to work. The work is proving and doing what you're saying, because people hear the say all the time. They don't see the prove and the do as much.
You got it.
So, and when they see that and they say equals the same as the prove and the do, then you start building that trust back, and you're in a pretty good spot. But so let's go ahead and let's wrap up this segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. David. We will come back with our last and final segment, get our last question, and a little bit of a wrap up on how you can connect with Steve. So we will see you guys in a bit. Welcome to our third and final segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. We're here with Steve deBree, and we're going to hit our last question, which is, what do you think is the best way for leaders to improve their leadership skills?
Wow. Best way. So, well, to a certain extent, it's based on what the issue is with them.
You're thinking, I got a million ways. When are you going to pick the best?
Wow. Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
You're probably not a lawyer. You're thinking, I'm going to give you my best lawyer answer. It depends. Here's a bill for $300.
And that's true. That's true. Yeah. Well, attorneys, they get paid by the word, right? Well, it's funny that we work with a firm that I do coaching training for their new partners. Now, these are not new attorneys. These are attorneys who have been elected to become, partners in the firm.
Become partners, yes.
Yeah. And we've done that for a number of years. And
nice.
And there are some of that have more natural skill than others, and others are just brilliant legal minds. But the people side of things they struggle with, and it's been eye-opening for them in terms of developing those skills. So, but they're heads of their own, if you will, practices and all that. I think one of the things is the biggest mistake, or what best way for them to improve their leadership skills. First and foremost, that I think it starts with their attitude of, do I want to? Do I think I've arrived? And because now I've arrived, that I'm exempt from that. And you'll see certain levels. you get to certain organizations, and instead of being in the developmental program with their people, they'll exclude themselves from it, and they're too busy. They have other things that are quote unquote more important. I was doing a rollout for a big sales initiative we had with one of the with a bank that's across the entire country. And the executive VP that ran the area went through every single session with us. He was there. He was not on his computer. He was at the table, engaging, responding, doing some of the things we were doing. He was walking the talk. And so I think that's awesome. Part of it. The other thing I think in terms of improving leadership skills is, and a lot of times what happens is folks are concerned about how they appear to others. And yet with all the change going on, we've got people across organizations that are, we say challenge your comfort zone. Everybody's saying you got to learn new things and learn. To what extent are they putting themselves into that situation? One of the things with some of the processes that I've had over the years, and I've done a lot of work with, smaller community banks, maybe 300, 400 people.
Yeah.
Where I've had the executive leaders, the CEO has been certified to conduct one of the developmental processes. We had it on service. Interesting that one of the CEOs went through the whole thing and he led the sessions. Now, he did have a training department that ultimately ran that for new hires, but he would come in and do it. He would sit through, it was a half-day session. He would sit through at least 2 hours, and he would lead one of the sessions in front of the group. Nice. And a lot of times this is not what they do naturally, and it wasn't just meet the CEO, what are your questions for him? Because, he was facilitating discussion, connecting with people, and doing those types of things. And that's not my role. Well, once again, let's go back to Kotter's definition of this is a direction, over communicating it. I'm going to be here. You're brand new. You're going to meet me. And this is what we're all about. And here's the foundational framework that we have for how we interact with one another.
Think about how powerful it is when you come in new in an organization. You feel like you have a personal connection with the CEO. And it's not just, here's a service class we're doing. And this is just some training we go through. There's really they mean this. Literally the CEOs coming in and facilitating this, obviously top-down buy-in. I mean, and you just gauge that from right there being it. So you're like, okay, maybe this was a good choice to come work here because, these guys are the real deal. Yep. Because of that. I mean, there's a lot of goodness that comes to, if that's a once-a-month thing, that's 2 hours a month well spent.
Yeah. I had a gentleman that we did work for a utility here a number of years ago, and the CEO has since retired, as he's passed away. He was a wonderful gentleman. And I remember at the end of the session, there was always a graduation. It was a luncheon. And there'd be 35, 40 people in every class, and they'd all go to the front of the room and sort of do a presentation, minute and a half, 2 minutes. It's a major benefit I gained from the session. Here's an example of the last 12 weeks of interacting with either a colleague or a customer. And then they'd vote for somebody. Well, to fill the time at the end, here's the CEO. He'd come up to the front of the room and make comments about what he heard. And he'd point out people. He says, you and I started working together at the same time. And I remember us working. And then he'd acknowledge this. And he would show up to every single final graduation. 1,000 people in this organization.
Wow, and that's awesome.
Here's one of the things that, and I heard so often, is that people say, "My people are my most important asset. My people are my most important asset." And then I'll say, "Well, you live your priorities with your calendar. So here's what I'd like you to do: take a look back at the prior month, and how many meetings did you have specifically designed around being with one of your people in a coaching and developmental conversation?" And I'll ask that question. All of a sudden, I can't get eye contact from anybody. No one will look up. So here's the thing: is when you say what for the improve the leadership skills is to be very aware of where they're spending their time. Are they spending their time on management activities, or are they spending their time in leadership activities? Now, you don't forsake one for the other,
right?
But there needs to be some level of balance there, and that's why I think Kotter's clarity around the distinction between leadership and management. You don't forsake one, and you blend the two, by the way. You just need to know what you're doing. I want to make sure that I used to get stuck in the planning, budgeting, delegating, and then controlling and the illusion of control and problem solving. But I want to weave leadership into it, So.
Well, I think you have to. I think, like you said, it's hard to be a really good, here's the direction we're going, visionary leader if you can't do any of the management skill set at all. I mean, if that is you, then you better have a really strong number two that can that can make that stuff happen for you, and you can just kind of stay in vision land. But as you start going further down in the organization, especially as get to directors, managers, supervisors, the managerial, I've got to get stuff done and resource my people becomes more and more important. But they have to weave that leadership in. I mean, we talk about Gallup stats and stuff, but one of the things too is 70% of the variance in employee engagement comes down to the person's frontline supervisor.
Yep.
And
interesting.
I firsthand, before I left the fire department, I mean, you think, okay, greatest job in the world, but then you end up having one particular boss that just makes life so miserable. You don't even want to be there anymore.
Yeah.
So that's very much. Gallup nailed it on that one.
Isn't that Gallup stat too? When they talk about when you're and this is when your top people leave. I think it's 70% of the time when your top people leave, it's cited the relationship they had with their immediate supervisor, whoever that was. So it's not just across the board, everybody. It's your top people. And boy, if you're losing your top people, whoa.
Yeah. Well, and the bad part too is, this goes back to a Gallup thing too. If people are engaged and they're happy, it takes about 20% at a minimum of a salary increase for them to even consider going somewhere else. But when they're not engaged, or especially if they're actively disengaged, pennies. I mean, it takes nothing to poach them.
Yeah. Getting back to this. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say that goes right back to the turnover, to the hidden costs, and like I said, it's just horrible cycle, vicious cycle.
So here, getting back to your question, what do you think is the best way for leaders to improve the leadership skills? I really think, and it's not just because I use them, but I think it's important for people to periodically do some type of professional assessment against what's required for the position. We call it benchmarking. But where are they? How's that shift over time? What is it? What are the refinements that will be significant for them? And and the level of awareness about their behaviors and where their predispositions are and how those tend to be magnified. I mean, somebody at the front line tosses a pebble into the water, it's a little ripple. I mean, the CEO tosses a pebble into the water. They think it's a pebble. It turns into a boulder or waves that just... So, it's not enough to say, oh, I did that 15 years ago. And when was the last time you did it? And how are you utilizing that daily? It's that awareness. And that way it's an objective type of you're against this standard, you're against this, and also 360s to get a sense around the critical areas that are important to performance.
100%. It all just goes back to self-awareness on one end of it. And it's funny, when I was doing my dissertation, I was comparing basically somebody's level of, to make it simple, self-directed learning, okay, versus their effectiveness as a leader. Now, of course, I give them 2 self-report assessments to do, or surveys to do, to gather this data. The level of self-directed leadership, self-directed learning, fine, that whatever that is, but that just is what it is, right? No different than a DES for driving courses or competencies type of thing. Pretty darn accurate for what it is. The leadership development, the funny thing is I ended up having to go around my hind parts to get to where I wanted to go, because, yes, they answered the question, and it was a 360 too. So even though, yes, on their self-directed report, I was able to pull out, okay, well, here's how they measure a certain amount of leadership effectiveness as answered by them. I didn't care. What I cared about and what I used for the actual survey data for the dissertation was, how do your people rate you effective? Now, what was interesting, that I literally opened up, Pandora's box and didn't realize there was an entire lane of research just to that gap. how you see yourself as an effective leader versus how your people do. I mean, the best leaders, it's almost dead on, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times it was funny from a demographics perspective. There's a lot of times older white males would be like, I'm the best thing since, sliced bread and the second coming. They're like, yeah, no, not quite. You suck, right? And so the bigger that gap was, the worse it was. A lot of times, a lot of female executives, it would almost be the other way. Like, I don't see myself as being the greatest, and they're like, no, man, you were awesome. So like, so it was just when I started looking into the research of the gap, it was fascinating. And then I got a quick smackdown by my professor saying, look, you got the rest of your life to study that crap. Just get this thing done. Don't worry about that. But it was just interesting to see how, like I said, since you mentioned about assessments in 360s, if you're not self-aware, whether it's emotional intelligence, or whatever, if you don't know this stuff, it's a huge weakness. And I think the farther up the chain you go, the more how you communicate with people, how you deal with people. Like you mentioned, you have a broader sense of the purpose, how you read the room, just your communications with folks is way more important than at a lower level in the organization. And EQ is massive the higher up you go. So I think you're right. I think that's a great way is one, your attitude. You had mentioned that. Do I want to change? And then, hey, how self-aware am I of my particular situation? Because it's hard to move the needle if you don't know where you're at.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's it. And I used to say, it's probably terrible English, but I say, what I'm unaware of, I'm powerless to change.
It's absolutely true. It goes back to you don't know what you don't know, and so that was the unfortunately that then we'll get to the wrap up. But unfortunately, that was the one like red pill moment. Like the Matrix, you take the red pill and the blue pill. Unfortunately, the red pill moment was when it started. Right, Ph.D. program. We were in a big lecture hall, and the dean of the school was there, and he was talking about that exact thing. And once we started going through, we had no idea what we didn't know. So a lot of the people will come out of MBA programs and they think, man, I am hot stuff, right, man? I know this, I got this, I know whatever. And then when they peeled back the curtain and you realize, oh my God, I had no idea the volumes of this stuff that was out there for this industry and what I didn't know. Then by the time you finish and oh, you're an expert in that, you're like, man, I barely feel like I've scratched the surface, right?
Oh, yes.
Like if you knew how much was out there on this topic and what people have done and books people have written and research they've done, but the further you went into it, even when graduating, it's like you feel more of an idiot when you leave the program because it's so humbling on when you realize, oh my God, I had no idea what I didn't know versus before when you just come out as, like I said, I'll pick on the MBAs because they're just fun to pick on. But somebody that comes out of an MBA program thinking, I'm it.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
So with that, tell our listeners how they can connect with you, with your company, your book, website, LinkedIn. Man, they're like, man, this Steve guy is all right, man. I got to get some more of that. How do they make that happen, boss?
Well, go to LinkedIn. I'm there. And just Steve deBree. It's DE, capital BREE. Performance Possibilities Group Incorporated is my business. My email address is just sdebree, DEBREE. I grew up with a nickname. I think about debris. Let's spell it right. I grew up with a nickname. Trash man. All right. So that ought to be a brand I ought to have, but deBree at Performance Possibilities. That's plural, performancepossibilities.com. And that really speaks to, what's been my mission is creating the environment where people are free to discover new possibilities for their lives. That's it. And helping people have transformational experiences. So all of that potential that exists within folks, gets realized. Well, not all of it, but we tap into it. You know what? One of our underpinning beliefs is people tend to perform consistent with the level of their inner beliefs. And one of the things we help people do is become aware of them and then challenge them and have processes that help them push those boundaries continuously back. And that's what
I love it. And I love the fact that when you come in for the sales, you're focusing on the leadership and what they can do from a leadership perspective to versus just a sales skills perspective. I think to get the most out of their people and realizing that, hey, good leadership ends up in good performance.
Yeah. And to that, Dave, one of the things is a really around the mindset of salespeople specifically. Here's an offer, and you can send me an email, and if you're interested in this. If you've got a couple salespeople, love to do a comparison. That couple high performers, people that performing real high, and a couple sort of head scratchers. They're not performing, and we're not sure why. That I'd love to offer maybe the first 10 folks that connect to do assessments on those 4 people, and I'll tell you exactly who your high performers are and what they might be struggling with and what they're probably struggling with. So I've got enough. You only have so much time in the day, but to offer that, 2 on each. So just email me, let me know. And be more than happy.
We'll put that in the description, and we'll put out some other postings specifically about that. So no, that would be great, because like I said, people know who their high performers are, people know who their low performers are, and to actually have something quantifiable that they can see on paper. This is the difference on what's making these guys high performers and these guys low performers. It's huge. So that's a great offer. We'll certainly put that in the description. We'll put some stuff on that. But with that, thank you, Steve.
Dave, thank you for having me. Okay, appreciate it.
All right. And so anyway, make sure you guys connect with Steve, and we'll have all this stuff in the description. And with that, we'll wrap up this episode of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, and we will see you all next time. Take care.